Mail order husband with secret fortune arrives to burn Homestead, rebuilds with one-armed widow. The sun hung low over Copper Valley, a pale coin sinking into a sky streaked with ash. The hills still carried the scent of smoke, dry grass, and grief. What had once been the proud Hensley homestead now stood as little more than a skeleton of blackened timber and scorched earth. Clara Hensley stood at the edge of what used to be her porch, a single sleeve pinned neatly against her bodice, the wind tugging at her brown skirts. Her right arm, strong and sure, rested on the head of a shovel. The other, the one she'd lost at the blaze that took her husband 2 winters ago, was gone below the shoulder, a loss she wore like a quiet flag of endurance. Her boys, Sam and Jacob, chased each other through the ruins, kicking up dust and broken boards. They were too young to remember how grand their home had been before the fire, and too old to still believe that Pa might somehow come back. A sound cut through the wind, the rattle of iron wheels on hard-packed road. Clara's heart stilled. She shaded her eyes against the late afternoon light, watching a stagecoach crest a hill, its horses heaving, dust pluming behind. "He's coming, Ma," Sam called. Clara nodded once. That'd be him. She'd sent for a man months ago, out of necessity, not romance. Winter was coming fast, and the barn roof wouldn't hold. Her left arm couldn't handle the work that lay ahead. The ad she'd placed had been simple. Widow with 2 sons seeks a hard-working man for partnership and rebuilding. Must be sober, able-bodied, and willing to start again. The man who answered called himself Elias Grant. His letters were sparse, honest, perhaps even shy. He'd written that he had no family worth naming, no debt, and no fear work. That had been enough. Now the coach slowed to a stop. The door opened and a tall figure stepped down, broad shoulders beneath a worn coat, travel dust coating his boots. Elias's eyes, blue-gray and steady, met hers across the road. For a moment, they simply studied one another, 2 souls measuring the cost of what they'd agreed to. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Hensley?" "That's right," Clara said. "You must be Elias." "Yes, ma'am." His voice was low, even, with a hint of tiredness in it, the kind carried by men who'd seen too much. The driver tossed down his bag, and the coach rumbled away, leaving the 4 of them standing in the silence of prairie. Clara broke it first. "Well," she said, motioning toward the ruins, "that's the place. What's left of it, anyhow?" Elias stepped closer, surveying the damage. Charred beams, sagging roof lines, the faint outline of a chimney still standing proud against the dying sun. His face softened, not with pity but with recognition. He bent, touched the scorched ground, and nodded. "It can be rebuilt." Clara almost laughed. "You sound sure of that." He glanced up, meeting her eyes. "I've seen worse." Jacob, her eldest, edged closer. "You know how to build, mister?" Elias smiled faintly. "Enough to keep rain off your heads, if that's what you're skinned." Sam, curious, circled him. "Where you from?" "Nowhere worth remembering," Elias said, his gaze flicking toward the horizon. Clara caught that look, a shadow of something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. She didn't pry. In truth, she had ghosts enough of her own. "Come on," she said briskly. "You'll need water and a place to sleep. I can offer one of those, anyway." They led him to the barn, a rough structure that had miraculously survived the fire. Inside, it smelled of hay and horses, of honest labor and effort that hadn't yet burned away. Clara unlatched a small chest and pulled out a folded quilt. "Ain't much, but it's clean. You can bed here till we fix the lean-to." "Thank you," Elias said. His manners were quiet, practiced. He moved with care, as though every gesture was measured. Outside, the evening deepened. The boys chased each other in the last light, while Clara filled a tin pot from a well. She felt his eyes on her, not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect. Finally, Elias spoke. "You said in your letter you'd lost your husband to the fire." She nodded, her expression flat. He went back inside for the boys' things. Roof came down before he made it out. "I'm sorry." Clara shrugged. "Sorry don't change much. Only thing left to do is rebuild." He watched her for a moment, then said softly, "If you'll have me, I'll help you do just that. For the first time in months, Clara allowed a thin smile to form. "Then we have an understanding, Mr. Grant." "Elias," he corrected gently. "Elias, then." As night fell, he settled onto his cot, staring at the barn rafters. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small golden locket, worn and engraved with a crest no one here would recognize. He turned it in his hand, thinking of the inheritance he'd fled, the fortune that had cost him his family's respect but bought his freedom. Now, as the wind rustled the grass outside, he whispered to himself, "Let it stay buried, beyond the barn walls." Clara extinguished the lantern and looked toward the stars. Her new husband was a stranger, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. The prairie exhaled around them, smoke, dust, and the faint scent of something new being born from ruin. And as the coyotes howled in the distance, Elias Grant and Clara Hensley's story truly began. The first morning after Elias arrived broke with a crimson dawn over Copper Valley. The prairie stretched wide and golden, dew glittering on the grass like drops of glass. A faint chill clung to the air, and the scent of wet ash still lingered from what had been lost. Elias was already awake, seated on the split-rail fence when the rooster crowed. He'd slept little. Years of moving from place to place had trained him not to grow comfortable anywhere, not even in peace. But as the horizon blushed with light, he found himself watching the widow's homestead, what little of it still stood, and thinking, maybe this time's different. From the barn, Clara emerged, skirts tucked up for work, hair braided tight. She didn't waste time with greetings. "You any good with an axe?" she asked, passing him one. "I've swung worse things," he said, taking the handle. "Then you'll start by cutting down the broken timbers by the well. I'll have Sam and Jacob help stack what's left. We'll need dry wood for winter if we can't build fast enough." Her voice carried authority. Brisk, clear, no room for pity or pause. He admired that. As he began his work, the rhythmic thud of his axe echoed across the valley. With each swing, would split cleanly, sending resin scent into the air. Clara's boys watched for a while, wide-eyed. "Ma," Jacob whispered, "he don't swing like the other men from town." "No," Clara murmured, watching the steady, controlled motion of Elias's shoulders. "He doesn't." She turned away before the thought could form fully. And that's not a bad thing. By noon, sweat glistened on Elias's neck, and his shirt clung to his back. He wiped his brow with his sleeve and caught Clara watching from the porch, her face unreadable. He nodded toward her pinned sleeve. "You take breaks often enough?" She frowned. "Can't afford to." "Still," he said gently, "lose a limb don't mean you need to lose your breath, too." That earned him a glare sharp enough to cut timber. "You don't need to speak on what you don't understand." "I understand loss," he replied evenly, "and pride." Their eyes met, steady, silent, full of unspoken recognition. Then Clara turned away, muttering, "Dinner's at 6." Inside the barn that evening, the smell of stew drifted through the air, rabbit, onion, and sage. The boys sat at the table, boots dangling, while Elias washed at the basin. Clara ladled food without fuss. "We say grace," she said. Elias bowed his head automatically. The simple prayer filled the room, humble words spoken by tired hearts. When they finished, Clara glanced up. "You got a church where you're from?" "Had one," he said. "Didn't stay long enough to learn the preacher's name." "Why not?" He paused, spoon in midair. "Too many sermons about forgiveness. Never sat right, hearing that from men who never had to ask for it." The table went quiet. Clara studied him, sensing the weight behind the words, the old ghost crouching somewhere in his past. She didn't pry, not yet. After supper, when the boys had gone to bed, Elias worked by lamplight, sketching plans for a new roof in the dirt outside the barn. Clara stepped out, arms folded. "You draw?" she asked, surprised. "Some. My pa taught me." She crouched beside him, watching the rough lines take shape. "You could have just asked me what I wanted." He smiled faintly. "Didn't want to assume you'd take advice from a stranger." She gave a quiet laugh. "You're learning quick." Then she straightened, brushing dust off her skirt. "That'll do. We'll start with the barn extension tomorrow." I'll need you to cut and fit the beams. I can help with the planing. One hand's enough for that. Elias looked up at her silhouetted against the lantern light. You don't let much slow you down, do you? Her voice softened, almost wistful. If I did, we'd have starved by now. He nodded. Then I'll keep pace. That night, after she'd gone inside, Elias sat alone beside the embers of their small fire. From his coat, he drew out the gold locket again, thumb brushing its smooth surface. Inside was a miniature portrait, an older man and woman, faces stiff and proper. His parents. He hadn't looked at it in months. He thought of what he'd left behind, land inheritance, and the cold marble walls of a mansion that had never felt like home. His fortune could have bought him comfort, yes, but not peace, not the kind that came from callous hands and honest work. And yet, as the stars stretched across the sky, Elias wondered if his secret would eventually catch up to him. What happens when she finds out who I really am? He closed the locket and slipped it away. Some truths, he told himself, could wait. At dawn the next day, Clara found him already outside, mending fence posts before she'd even lit the stove. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked. Not used to quiet, he said. She had the neat line of posts. Well, quiet's what we got plenty of here. He glanced over his shoulder. Then maybe I'll learn to like it. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened. A flicker of something new, fragile, uncertain. They worked together through the day, their rhythm steady, unspoken. When she grew frustrated tying rope one-handed, Elias quietly stepped beside her, wordlessly looping the knot and stepping back. Don't do it for me, she snapped. I didn't, he said. Just showed how it's done. Clara blinked, realizing he'd left enough slack for her to finish the knot herself. She tightened it neatly, then met his gaze. That's better. He nodded once. Thought so. That night, the wind swept through the valley, carried with the scent of cut pine, and a feeling neither of them dared to name. In the faint glow of the lantern, Elias watched Clara tuck her boys into bed through the open doorway. Her voice was low, warm, full of a tenderness that didn't match the hard edges she wore by day. When she stepped outside again, he was stacking the last of the wood. We'll have the barn done in a week, he said quietly. She nodded. If the weather holds. For a long moment, they stood in silence, two weary souls bound by work and unspoken need. Finally, Clara said, You're different, Elias. Most men from town look at me and see what's missing. He turned toward her. I see what's still standing. Something shifted in the air, small but powerful, like a spark finding kindling. Then, before the moment could grow, Clara cleared her throat. We start early tomorrow. Don't be late. Elias smiled faintly. Wouldn't dream of it. As she walked away, he looked toward the stars again, feeling, for the first time in years, like the sky above him wasn't so empty after all. The wind changed that week, warmer, carrying the scent of sage and dust from the south. It was the kind of wind that signaled both change and trouble, though no one on the Hensley homestead knew it yet. By then, Elias and Clara had found a rhythm. The half-burnt barn now stood tall again with new timbers. The roof, hand-cut pine beams from the ridge, gleamed under the spring sun. The boys chased chickens and laughed through the yard, their laughter echoing against the foothills. Elias had built a small fence around Clara's herb garden, too, where she grew what little survived the fire, rosemary, yarrow, and a bit of mint she called her luxury. She never said it aloud, but every time she passed by that fence, she'd brush her fingers along it, as though testing its strength and perhaps his. It was mid-afternoon when they heard hoofbeats on the road, hard, uneven, urgent. Clara stiffened where she stood by the well. Elias noticed the way her expression changed, the way her hand went to her hip by instinct, not fear, but readiness. A rider appeared, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. He wore a coat too fine for labor, and spurs that jingled more for show than purpose. Boyd Mather. Elias caught the name when Clara muttered it under her breath. The man dismounted, tipping his hat low in mock politeness. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think the Hensley place would ever see life again. Clara didn't move from where she stood. We manage fine. Boyd's gaze slid to Elias, studying him with a sneer. This your new help? Before Clara could answer, Elias stepped forward. Name's Elias Grant. Her husband. The word hung in the air like a drawn gun. Boyd raised his brows. That's so? Mail order, was it? His tone was a smirk wrapped in words. Clara's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. Ain't none of your business, Boyd. Oh, I think it is, Boyd said, circling Elias like a man sizing up livestock. Your husband, God rest him, owed me a fair bit before he passed. I was hoping to collect. Elias's hand flexed slightly near his belt. You'll take that up with the grave, then ain't no debts following here. Boyd laughed, slow and sharp. You talk big for a man I've never seen in these parts. Where'd you come from, Grant? East, Elias said simply. East is a mighty big place. Boyd prodded. Big enough that you don't need to know which part. Clara cut in, voice like cold steel. That's enough, Boyd. You came, you talked, now you can ride back. Boyd's smile faltered. For a long moment, he held her gaze, something cruel flickering in his eyes. Then he tipped his hat again, but there was no politeness in it this time. Fine, but don't think this is over. The Hensley land's good soil, and good soil's hard to keep when you ain't got a man who belongs here. Elias stepped forward, close enough that the space between them shrank to a heartbeat. Then it's lucky she does. Boyd's smirk faltered. He spat in the dust, swung into the saddle, and rode off, the echo of hooves fading into the distance. When silence returned, Clara let out a long, steady breath. She turned toward Elias. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said, but I wanted to. Boyd's dangerous, she warned. He's the kind that don't quit when told no. Elias's eyes darkened. I've known that kind before. You mean back east? She asked quietly. He nodded once but said nothing more. She didn't push. It wasn't her way. But that night, as she washed dishes by lamplight, she caught him outside, standing still in the moonlight, staring toward the ridge where Boyd had disappeared. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. He looked like a man ready for something, trouble, maybe, or reckoning. The next morning, the boys found boot tracks by the barn door. Not Elias's, not theirs. Clara's face hardened. Boyd, she muttered. Elias crouched beside the tracks, examining them. He was close. Watched, maybe, wanted you to see he'd been here. What's he after? Control, Elias said. The kind men take when they can't build nothing worth keeping. Clara looked toward the tree line. Her good hand clenched tight. He's been sniffing around since my husband died. Said I couldn't run the land alone. Offered to buy it cheap. I told him I'd burn it again before selling. Elias's mouth twitched into a grim smile. Guess he took you serious. I did, she said flatly. Elias's gaze lingered on her. This woman with one arm, 2 sons, and more fire than most men he'd known in battle. Something stirred deep inside him. Not pity, not even admiration. It was respect. And something quieter, harder to name. Later that day, he hitched a wagon and rode into Copper Ridge for supplies. The town was small. 1 saloon, 1 general store, 1 church that doubled as a meeting hall. But as soon as he stepped inside the store, talk quieted. New man at the Hensley place, someone muttered. Mail order husband, another whispered. Elias ignored them. He'd faced soldiers, bankers, and worse. Idle gossip meant nothing, until he heard a voice behind him, smooth and mocking. Didn't expect to see you so soon, Grant. Boyd, leaning against a barrel, grinning. Elias turned slowly. You follow me? Just curious what kind of man marry a cripple for a meal ticket. The words hit like a whip, but Elias didn't rise to them. He set his supplies on the counter, counted his coins, and said only, Careful with your tongue, Mather. It might cost you more than you can pay. Boyd sneered. You think you're something special? I heard you came from nothing. Elias's gaze met his, cold and steady. Then maybe I know how to make something of it. Boyd shifted, unease flickering behind his smirk. He spat once more on the floor, then turned to leave. As the door swung shut behind him, the storekeeper muttered, You best keep your eyes open, mister. Boyd don't forget when someone stands up to him. Elias nodded. Neither do I. When he returned that evening, the sun dipped low, turning the valley bronze. Clara waited by the gate, her expression tight until she saw he was unharmed. Did he bother you? She asked. Elias set down the sack of flour and sugar. He tried, didn't succeed. She exhaled, half in relief, half in worry. He'll come back. Then I'll be here, Elias said simply. Their eyes met, quiet and firm, two people bound now not just by work, but by shared defiance. As the night settled around them, Clara said softly, You don't scare easy, do you? Not a man like him, Elias replied. What does scare you then? He hesitated, then said, Belong and... She studied him for a moment, the wind stirring her braid. You might find you already do. For the first time, Elias looked at her not as the woman he'd agreed to help, but as the woman he'd come to need. And in the distance, thunder rolled, soft, low, the promise of storm yet to come. The wind began its slow rise 2 days after Elias's trip to town. It came first as a whisper through the tall grass, then a restless groan that set the trees to swaying. In the high plains, storms didn't creep. They built, brooding on the horizon until they swallowed the sky whole. By late afternoon, dark clouds rolled down from the ridge, heavy and bruised. The air thickened, metallic and hot, the way it did before the heavens cracked open. Elias stood on the roofline, hammer in hand, nailing down the last of the shingles. Sweat ran into his eyes. Below him, Clara called up, You'd best come down before that sky eats you alive. He looked out toward the horizon. Lightning flashed in the distance, a white fork splitting the dark clouds. Few more nails, and we'll have a dry bed tonight. Better a wet bed than a dead husband, she hollered back. He grinned at that. She was fierce even in warning, and climbed down the ladder, boots hitting dirt just as thunder rumbled overhead. The first drops came as fat splatters of cold rain. Within minutes, the heavens opened. The boys squealed, racing for the barn as the storm broke full. Wind howled across the valley, bending the grass flat. Clara and Elias fought to tie down the wagon tarp. Both soaked through before they could finish. Rain hammered their shoulders, wind snatching words from their mouths. Inside, Elias shouted, grabbing the reins and leading her toward the barn. Lightning flared behind them, turning the world white for an instant. They slammed the doors shut, panting, drenched. The horses stamped nervously, thunder shaking the rafters. Never seen it come on so fast, Clara gasped, pushing wet hair from her face. Elias wrung out his shirt, his breath misting in the chill. Plains will do that. Kind of beauty that don't come gentle. She laughed softly, voice trembling between exhaustion and awe. That's one way to call it. For a while, they worked in silence, checking the animals, laying dry hay, making sure the doors held. Rain pounded the roof in relentless rhythm. When the worst would hit, they sat side by side on overturned barrels near the lantern light, steam rising from their clothes. Elias broke the silence first. You've done all this, built, raised 2 boys one-handed. Most men I've met couldn't manage half that with 2. Clara gave a tired smile. You don't think I've heard that before? Folks in town say I got a mean streak. They don't understand it's the only way to stay alive. He watched her, quiet admiration behind his eyes. Maybe it ain't mean. Maybe it's just strong. She shrugged. Strong don't make the nights less cold. Elias turned to her, his expression softening. No, but it gets you to the next morning. And sometimes that's enough. They sat in the dim barn, thunder rolling like distant artillery. For the first time, Clara let her shoulders drop, the mask of toughness slipping. You ever lose something you couldn't get back? She asked quietly. His breath caught. Yes. She looked at him, the question hanging. What was it? He hesitated, then spoke slowly. Peace. A long time ago. The lantern flickered. Rain softened against the roof. Now a steady hiss instead of a roar. Elias rubbed his hands together, staring at the dirt floor. My family, they weren't kind people. Had more money than sense. Thought it gave them the right to buy the world. When I left, I swore I'd never touch a cent of it again. You walked away from money? Walked away from what came with it. He gave a half smile. Turns out gold don't weigh as heavy as guilt. Clara's brow furrowed. You run from something, Elias? He looked at her then, really looked. From what I was raised to be, from a name that ain't mine anymore. Her heart softened. She saw it now, the careful way he carried himself, the silence behind his eyes. Not just a man running from the past, but one trying to earn something new, redemption. She reached out instinctively, then remembered her left sleeve hung empty. But Elias didn't look away. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice low. That fire you survived, that how you... She nodded once. It was early morning. I was making breakfast, boys still asleep. Stovepipe sparked into the rafters before I even saw the smoke. My husband, Daniel, went back inside for our things. His father's rifle, a few of the boys' books. I followed him in. Her voice cracked. He pushed me out through the window. The beam came down right after. Silence filled the barn, soft, sacred. Elias said quietly, "You tried to save him." She looked at him, eyes wet and hard all at once. I'd give my arm again if it meant he'd have made it out. He nodded slowly, eyes glinting in the flicker of the lantern. That kind of love don't die, Clara. But it don't mean you can't live again. Her gaze met his, steady, searching. You talk like a preacher. I talk like a man who's had to start over too many times. A loud crack of thunder jolted them both. The horses whinnied, and rain began leaking through a small gap in the roof. Elias rose instantly, pulling his coat off. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "I'm fine," she protested. "You're shivering. I've done worse." He smiled faintly. "I believe that, but take it anyway." She hesitated, then took the coat. It was far too large, smelling faintly of pine tar and tobacco. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she felt warm, not from the coat, but from the quiet, unspoken care of the man beside her. Elias leaned against the beam, eyes half closed, listening to the rain. "Storm will pass by morning." "Storms always do," she murmured. But as the night deepened, neither of them moved far from the other. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The land smelled of wet soil and cedar. The barn stood strong. Outside, the first light broke over the ridge, gilding the soaked valley in gold. Elias pushed open the doors, breathing deep. "Still standing," he said. Clara came up beside him, eyes on the sunrise. "Guess we are too." Their shoulders brushed. Neither stepped away. He turned slightly, voice low. "You've got more grit than any soul I've met, Clara." She looked up at him, eyes unreadable. "And you've got secrets you still ain't told me." He smiled a little. "Maybe one day. Maybe I'll still be here to hear them." They share a quiet, lingering look, half challenge, half promise, as the wind swept through the wet grass and the day began anew. And somewhere behind that rising sun, Boyd Mather's shadow moved again, restless, waiting for the next chance to strike. The morning after the storm was as quiet as prayer. Mist hung low over the valley, beating on the grass and fence rails. Elias was already outside, mending a post that had cracked under the wind. Each hammer strike echoed into the still air like a heartbeat. Clara stood on the porch, her sleeve pinned neatly at her side, holding a mug of steaming coffee with her one good hand. For a rare moment, peace had returned, the kind that made her almost forget the ache in her chest. The boys were chasing a chicken around the yard, laughter ringing clear and bright. It had been months since Clara had heard them sound so alive. She watched Elias work, his shirt sleeves rolled up, muscles shifting with each motion. He moved with precision, not the hurried rhythm of a hired hand, but the steady confidence of a man who knew what he was building mattered. When he noticed her watching, he smiled faintly. "Looks like the fence will hold another season." She smiled back. "If it don't, I reckon you'll build another." "Maybe two," he said, with that quiet humor she'd grown used to. They shared a brief silence, the kind that didn't need filling, before the sound of distant hooves broke it. At first, Elias thought it was thunder again. Then came the jingle of spurs. The sharp crack of laughter carried on the wind. His entire body went still. Clara's brow furrowed. Visitors? He didn't answer. He just reached for the shotgun resting by the barn door. 3 riders came over the ridge, moving slow but deliberate. Dust rose behind them in pale curls. At the center rode a man in a black duster, tall, broad, the kind of presence that filled the horizon. "Boyd Mather," Clara breathed, her voice tightening. "He's back." Elias's jaw clenched. "Who is he?" "Neighbor, used to be. Claimed Daniel owed him money." Started circling after the fire, sniffing around what was left. Elias's eyes narrowed. Sniffing or threatening? She hesitated. Both. By the time the riders reached the gate, Elias was already there, shotgun in hand, face calm but unreadable. "Mornin', stranger," Boyd called, reining in his horse. His smile was wide, but his eyes were cold. Heard tell the widow hired herself a new man. Elias said nothing. Boyd tilted his head. "You her husband?" Elias didn't blink. "That's what the papers say." Boyd chuckled. "Mail order, huh? Guess the drought's got everyone desperate these days." His gaze slid past Elias toward Clara on the porch. "Didn't figure you'd move on so soon, Clara." Clara lifted her chin. "Didn't figure it was any of your concern, Boyd." His grin turned mean. "You still owe me for that mule your husband borrowed. I aim to collect. That mule died in the fire, same as my husband. Then maybe I'll take something else in trade." His eyes flicked toward the boys. Elias's voice came out low and even. "You'll take your men and ride on. There's no debt here." Boyd spat in the dirt. "You talk bold for a drifter." Elias stepped forward, the barrel of the shotgun lifting just slightly. "I ain't bold. Just done let men like you take what ain't theirs." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind hissed through the grass. Then Boyd laughed, short and sharp. "You got spirit, I'll give you that. But I've seen your kind before. Fancy words, shaky trigger. I'll be back, once that gun's too heavy to lift." He turned his horse, signaling his men. "Let's ride. This ain't finished." Elias watched them go until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did he lower the gun. That night, Clara found him by the corral, checking the fence again. The air smelled of pine and cooling embers. "You didn't have to stand up to him," she said quietly. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Yes, I did. Boyd's dangerous. Men like him don't forgive a public slight." Elias turned to her. "Then he'll have to live with it." She stepped closer. "You've got a secret, Elias. I see it in your eyes. Whatever you're running from, it's more than just bad memories." He exhaled slow. "You'd be right." "Then tell me." He hesitated. His hands tightened on the fence rail. "I told you I walked away from my family's money. What I didn't tell you is they sent men after me, men like Boyd, once upon a time. I left behind a trust fund, land, shares, a fortune I wanted nothing to do with, but they wanted me back to manage it. When I refused, they made sure word spread that I was dead." Clara's lips parted. "You mean—" "I've been living under another name ever since. Elias Ward isn't the name I was born with." "Then who are you?" He looked up at the stars, their cold shimmer reflected in his eyes. "Doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this place. You, the boys, you gave me a reason to build again." Clara's voice softened. "You could have gone anywhere. Why here?" "Because the ad said, 'One-armed widow seeks help rebuilding home. Must be kind.'" He gave a faint smile. Kindness sounded like something worth finding. Her throat tightened. "You sure you didn't come looking to save someone?" He met her gaze. "Maybe I came hoping someone might save me." A long silence hung between them, full of the kind of warmth that comes only when the truth is laid bare. Finally, Clara said, "Boyd'll come back. Next time, he won't just talk." Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." "You mean you'll be ready?" "No," he said, eyes firm. "We will—" She looked up at him, studying the man who had appeared like a ghost and now stood like a wall between her and the world. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Later that night, while the house slept, Elias went to the barn and opened a weathered saddlebag he'd kept hidden since the day he arrived. Inside were documents sealed in wax and a velvet pouch filled with coins, gold stamped with the emblem of the Eastern Banking Company. He ran his thumb over the coins, the light catching their polished faces. He whispered to the dark, "I swore I'd never use it again, but for them, maybe it's time." Outside, the coyotes called across the hills, a wild, distant sound that spoke of danger and survival. And as Elias closed the saddlebag and set it aside, the choice was made. He would face his past to protect their future. The days after Boyd's visit passed in uneasy quiet. The valley seemed to hold its breath, the wind slower, the nights too still. Even the boys noticed. Little Henry stopped chasing chickens and began sleeping with a wooden toy rifle by his bed. Clara said little, but her eyes often searched the ridgeline as if expecting figures to appear any moment. Elias worked harder than ever, mending fences, reinforcing the barn door, even fashioning a hidden trapdoor in the floorboards of the cabin. When she asked what it was for, he answered simply, "Insurance." By the third day, a letter arrived, a single sheet of folded paper pinned beneath a knife at the edge of their fence. Elias pulled it free and read the scrawled words aloud to Clara under the dim light of morning. "You think you can hide behind that gun and a crippled woman? The ridge remembers what's owed. Tomorrow I collect. B.M." Clara's voice was a whisper. "He means to burn us out again." Elias folded the paper slowly, jaw tight. "Then he'll find nothing left to burn." She stared at him, fear and resolve warring in her eyes. "You could run. Elias. If he's got men with him, you can't take them all." He met her gaze. "I've been running most of my life. If I run now, he'll come for you after. I won't let that happen." There was something final in his tone, the quiet way of a man who'd already decided what must be done. That night, while the boys slept, Clara and Elias sat by the fire. The flames threw soft light across the room, painting their faces in flickering gold. She said, "You keep talking about what you've lost, but maybe it's time you talk about what you still have." He looked up, startled. "And what's that?" Her voice was steady. "A home. 2 boys who think you hung the moon. And me, whether you like it or not." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached out, rough fingers brushing her hand. Careful, uncertain, but sure. "You've given me more than I deserve," he murmured. Clara's eyes glistened in the light. "Then earn it, Elias. Live through tomorrow." He nodded once. "I'll try." The attack came just before dawn. A horse's shrill cry split the silence, followed by the echo of boots and the hiss of torches cutting through fog. "Clara," Elias whispered, shaking her awake. "It's time." She was on her feet in an instant. The boys stirred, frightened. "Take them," he said, "through the trapdoor. Stay low. Don't make a sound unless you have to. What about you? I'll draw them off. I know how men like Boyd think." Her voice broke. "You'll get yourself killed." Elias gave a faint smile. "Not today." He took the shotgun from its place on the wall and kissed her forehead. Gentle, lingering. "Lock the door behind me." She caught his arm as he turned to go. "Elias." He looked back, and for a heartbeat, they said everything words couldn't. Then he was gone. Outside, the world was fire and smoke. Boyd's men had circled the yard, their torches cutting through the mist. The barn roof glowed faintly orange, flames licking upward. "Ward." Boyd's voice thundered through the dark. "You still playing house with my debt?" Elias stepped from the shadows, gun leveled, the firelight glinting off his eyes. "You come to talk or to die?" Boyd laughed. "You think one man can stop 3? Maybe not, but I've stopped worse." The first shot cracked the silence. Elias dropped behind a trough as bullets shredded the air. He returned fire, one shot clean through a rider's shoulder. The man screamed, spinning off his horse. The others closed in, circling the house. From inside, Clara held her boys close, teeth clenched as the walls trembled. She wanted to hide, but something inside her refused. She slipped free, took her late husband's old pistol from the chest by the bed, and crept toward the window. Outside, Elias was pinned down, Shotgun empty, smoke burning his eyes. Boyd advanced through the firelight, revolver drawn. Didn't think a mail-order husband had fight in him. Boyd sneered. What's the secret, Ward? You fancy yourself a hero. Elias's voice was low. No, just a man tired of being hunted. Boyd's grin faded. Ward. He paused, recognition flickering. No, Elias Ward. I've heard that name. Banker's son. The one who ran off with half a fortune. Elias's stomach turned cold. Boyd stepped closer, eyes glinting. You ain't no drifter. You're the prodigal prince of the Eastern Trust. I left it behind. Boyd cocked his gun. Then I'll take what's left. A sudden flash erupted. Not from Boyd, but from the window of the cabin. Clara's pistol fired, striking the torch in Boyd's hand and sending it tumbling. Flames caught his coat, and he cursed, slapping at the sparks. Elias seized the moment. He surged forward, tackling Boyd into the dirt. The two men fought hard, fists and fury, rolling in the mud and ash. Boyd's blade caught Elias across the shoulder, drawing blood, but Elias didn't stop. He landed a final, brutal punch that sent Boyd sprawling. Then he wrenched the knife from Boyd's hand and tossed it aside. Leave, Elias growled. And if you ever come back. Boyd spat blood, his grin returning even through the pain. This ain't over. You can't hide from who you are. Elias's eyes burned. Maybe not, but I can choose who I stand for. He stepped back, letting Boyd crawl to his horse. The wounded man spat again, then rode off into the fog, leaving his two fallen men behind. The fire died slowly in the dawn light. The smell of smoke clung to everything. Elias stood near the smoldering fence, blood seeping through his sleeve, chest heaving. Clara ran out from the house, boys behind her. Elias. He turned, barely steady on his feet. Everyone safe? She nodded, tears streaming. Because of you. He swayed, exhaustion overtaking him. She caught him with her one arm, pulling him close. You fool, she whispered, voice trembling. You could have died. His smile was faint but sure. Told you I'd earn it. They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls bound by fire and fight, the dawn rising slow over their broken land. Elias finally pulled back, his voice quiet. The truth's out now. They'll come for me eventually. When they do, I don't want you in the middle of it. Clara's eyes hardened. You don't get to decide that. This is my home. You're part of it. He looked at her, something like peace washing over him. Then maybe I finally found where I belong. The sun broke over the ridge, painting the valley gold and red, the colors of ash, iron, and rebirth. For the first time since the fire, Clara smiled like a woman who still had hope. The sun rose slow over the plains that morning, pink and gold spilling across the wet fields, touching every scar left behind by fire and fury. The air smelled of rain and smoke, but the storm had passed. For the first time in a long while, it truly felt like morning. Elias stood by the gate, his arm in a sling, watching the land come back to life. Smoke still curled from the blackened grass, but the cabin stood tall. So did the barn, patched and proud. Clara stepped out onto the porch, hair loose around her shoulders, her empty sleeve tied neatly. Her face was pale but steady. You should rest, she said softly. Elias smiled faintly. Can't. Too much to do. She walked toward him, boots crunching in the wet soil. You're hurt, Elias. The fence can wait. He looked up at her, and for once, he didn't argue. Maybe you're right. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was warm, familiar, like a rhythm they'd both learned by heart. That afternoon, a rider came from town, Sheriff Marin, an old man with a limp and eyes sharp as glass. He dismounted slowly, tipping his hat to Clara. Mrs. Hale. Then to Elias. You're the one who tangled with Boyd Mather last night? Elias nodded. He came here looking for trouble. He found plenty of it, the sheriff said dryly. Boyd's in the doctor's care. Shoulder busted, ribs cracked. Claims you ambushed him on your land. Elias didn't flinch. He set fire to my barn. Marin's gaze lingered. Seems to me that makes you even. But there's another matter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a wanted notice, old and faded from rain. Clara's stomach turned when she saw the sketch. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. The man on that poster had Elias's eyes. Elias Ward, Marin read, wanted for absconding from the Eastern Trust Company with unclaimed family assets. Last seen heading west under an assumed name. There's a bounty, though half the ink's worn off. Clara turned to Elias, her heart hammering. It's true. He met her gaze, weary but calm. Every word. Marin studied him. They say you stole near $50,000. Elias shook his head. Didn't steal a cent. I walked away from it. Left the whole thing behind. But the family lawyers wanted it back, and they figured lies worked better than proof. The sheriff folded the paper again. You're not a thief, then? Elias looked him in the eye. No, sir. I'm a man who wanted a life worth more than money. Marin studied him for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. Ain't my business to chase ghosts from the east. But if the law comes sniffing, you best be ready with your story. Elias nodded. Appreciate the warning. Marin tipped his hat again. You did good by this widow. Folks will remember that longer than any bounty. And with that, he rode off, leaving silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen on the porch. The words wanted and bounty echoed in her mind like church bells after a funeral. Elias turned toward her. You should know the truth. I think I already do, she said, voice trembling. I didn't come here to hide. I came because your letter, it sounded like something honest. I'd spent half my life pretending to be someone my family could be proud of. Then I saw your ad, and I realized maybe I could start over. Her eyes glistened. With a lie. He shook his head. With a name that finally belonged to me. For a long time, she said nothing. The wind moved through the fields, whispering between them. Finally, she stepped closer, her voice low. You saved my boys. You rebuilt my home. You faced down a man who's been haunting me for years. I don't care what name you wore before. I care who you are now. Elias's throat tightened. And who's that? She smiled faintly. The man I want standing beside me when the next storm comes. That evening, the family sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills. Henry leaned against Elias's good arm, while little Samuel whittled a stick beside Clara's rocking chair. The horizon burned orange, turning to purple, the kind of sky that promised peace. Clara said softly, the land will heal, just takes time. Elias nodded. So do people. She looked at him, eyes shining in the fading light. Then I suppose we'll both learn together. He smiled, reaching for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. The air was cool, and the scent of wet grass and cedar drifted through the quiet. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. Elias said, Clara, I could send for the money. Clear our debts. Fix what's broken. Give the boys a start. She tilted her head. You could, but would that make you any freer? He thought about that, then shook his head slowly. No, I think I'm freer right here. She smiled softly. Then let it be. Weeks passed. Spring came early that year. The valley greened again. Fences stood firm, and laughter filled the air where fire and silence once ruled. Clara's boys took to calling him Pa, without being told to, and each time they did, Elias felt something settle inside him, a peace he hadn't known he'd been chasing. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, he turned to Clara. You know, he said, I used to think fortune meant gold and land and names written in ledgers. Now I think it's this. This? She asked. He nodded toward the fields, the cabin, the boys playing the woman beside him. A place that needs you, a family that wants you, and the chance to build again. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Then we're rich, Elias Ward. He chuckled softly. Guess we are. The breeze carried their laughter across the plains, mixing with the songs of the crickets and the whisper of the grass. And as the last light faded, Elias looked out across the horizon, the land scarred but growing again, and thought that maybe redemption didn't come in the form of forgiveness, but in the quiet work of living right day by day. The homestead stood, rebuilt, The widow had found her strength again, and the mail-order husband, the man with the secret fortune, had finally learned the worth of love that could not be bought.